Chapter 20. Jonathan Harker's Journal. October 1st, evening. I found Thomas Snelling in his house at Bethnal Green, but unhappily he was not in a condition to remember anything. The very prospect of beer which my expected coming had opened to him had proved too much, and he had begun too early on his expected debauch. I learned, however, from his wife, who seemed a decent poor soul, that he was only the assistant of Smollett, who, of the two mates, was the responsible person. So off I drove to Walworth, and found Mr. Joseph Smollett at home and in his shirt-sleeves, taking a late tea out of a saucer. He is a decent, intelligent fellow, distinctly a good, reliable type of workman, and with a headpiece of his own. He remembered all about the incident of the boxes, and from a wonderful dog-eared notebook which he produced from some mysterious receptacle about the seat of his trousers, and which had hieroglyphical entries in thick, half-obliterated pencil, he gave me the destinations of the boxes. They were, he said, 6 in the cartload which he took from Carfax, and left at 197 Chicksend Street, Mile End, Newtown, and another 6 which he deposited at Jamaica Lane, Bermondsey. If then the Count meant to scatter these ghastly refuges of his over London, these places were chosen as the first delivery, so that later he might distribute more fully. The systematic manner in which this was done made me think that he could not mean to confine himself to 2 sides of London. He was now fixed on the far east on the northern shore, on the east of the southern shore, and on the south. The north and the west were surely never meant to be left out of his diabolical scheme, let alone the city itself, and the very heart of fashionable London in the southwest and west. I went back to Smollett and asked him if he could tell us if any of the other boxes had been taken from Carfax. He replied, "Well, Governor, you have treated me very handsome, and I have given him half a sovereign. And I'll tell you all I know. I heard a man by the name of Bloxham say 4 nights ago that are in hounds in Pitcher Alley, now he and his mate in a rare dusty job in an old house at Purfleet. There ain't many such jobs as here, and I am thinking that maybe Sam Bloxham could tell you some of it." I asked if he could tell me where to find him. I told him that if he could get me the address, it would be worth another half sovereign to him. He gulped down the rest of his tea and stood up, saying that he was going to begin the search then and there. At the door he stopped and said, "Look here, Governor, there ain't no sense in me keeping you here. I may find Sam soon, or I mayn't, but anyhow, he ain't like to be in the way to tell you much tonight. Sam is a rare one when he starts on the booze. If you can give me an envelope with a stamp on it and put your address on it, I'll find out where Sam is and found and post it to you tonight. But you better hurry up and after I'm soon in the morning. I never mind the booze the night afore." This is all practical, so none of the children went off with a penny to buy an envelope and a sheet of paper to keep the change. When she came back, I addressed the envelope and stamped it, and when Smollett had again faithfully promised to post the address when found, I took my way to home. We were on fast track anyhow. I'm tired tonight and I want to sleep. Mina is fast asleep, and looks a little too pale. Her eyes look as though she had been crying. Poor dear, I've no doubt it frets her to be kept in the dark, and it may make her doubly anxious about me and the others. But it is best as it is. It's better to be disappointed and worried in such a way now than to have her nerve broken. The doctors are quite right to insist on her being kept out of this stressful, dreadful business. I must be firm, for on me this particular burden of silence must rest. I shall not ever enter on the subject with her under any circumstances. Indeed, it may not be a hard task after all, for she herself has become recentant on the subject, and has not spoken of the Count or his doings ever since we told her of our decision. October 2nd, evening. A long and trying and exciting day. By the first post I got my directed envelope with a dirty scrap of paper enclosed, on which was written with a carpenter's pencil in a sprawling hand, "Sam Bloxham, Corcoran's, 4 Potter's Court, Bartell Street, Walworth. Ask for the despot." I got the letter in bed, and rose without waking Mina. She looked heavy and sleepy and pale, and far from well. I determined not to wake her, but that when I should return from this new search, I would arrange for her going back to Exeter. I think she would be happier in her own home, with her daily tasks to interest her, than in being here amongst us and in ignorance. I only saw Dr. Seward for a moment and told him where I was off to, promising to come back and tell the rest so soon as I could have found anything. I drove to Walworth and found, with some difficulty, Potter's Court. Mr. Smollett spelling misled me, as I asked for Potter's Court instead of Potter's Court. However, when I had found the court, I had no difficulty in discovering Corcoran's lodge house. When I asked the man who came to the door for the despot, he shook his head and said, "Oh, no, there ain't no such person near. I never heard of him in all my bloomin' days. Don't believe there ain't nobody of that kind living near or anywheres." I took out Smollett's letter, and as I read it, it seemed to me that the lesson of spelling the name of the court might guide me. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm the deputy," he answered. I saw at once that I was on the right track. Phonetic spelling had again misled me. A half-crown tip put on the deputy's knowledge at my disposal, and I learned that Mr. Bloxam, who had sent off the remains of his beer on the previous night at Corcoran's, had left for his work at Poplar at 5 o'clock that morning. He could not tell me where the place of work was situated, but he had a vague idea that it was some kind of new-fangled varus, and with this slender cue I had started for Poplar. It was 12 o'clock before I got any satisfactory hint of such a building. And this I got at a coffee shop where some workmen were having their dinner. One of them suggested that there was being erected at Cross Angel Street a new cold storage building, and as this suited the condition of the new-fangled warehouse, I at once drove to it. An interview with the surly gatekeeper and the surlier foreman, both of whom were appeased with the coin of the realm, put me on the track of Bloxam. He was sent for on my suggestion that I was willing to pay his day's wages to his foreman for the privilege of asking him a few questions on a private matter. He was a smart enough fellow, though rough of speech and bearing. When I had promised to pay for his information and given him in earnest, he told me that he had made 2 journeys between Carfax and the house in Piccadilly, and had taken from his house into the latter 9 great boxes, main heavy ones, with a horse and cart hired by him for his purpose. I asked him if he could tell me the number of the house in Piccadilly, to which he replied, "I know, governor, I forgets the number, but it was only a few door from a big white church, or something of the kind, but not long built. It was a dusty old house, too. Got nothing to the dustiness of the house we took the Bloxam houses from." "How did you get in, if both houses were empty?" "There was an old party what engaged me a waiting at the house at Purfleet, and he helped me to lift the boxes and put 'em in the dry. Curse me, but he was the strongest chap I'd ever struck, and him and an old feller with a white mustache, one that thin you would think he couldn't throw a shader." How this phrase thrilled through me. Why, he took up his end of the boxes like they was pounds of tea, and me a puffin' and a blowin' afore I could upend mine anyhow, and I ain't no chicken either. "How'd you get into the house in Piccadilly?" I asked. "He was there too. He must have started off and got there afore me, for when I rung the bell and kept him open the door hisself and helped me carry the boxes to the hall." "The whole 9? I asked. "Yes. There were 5 in the first load and 4 in the second. It was main dry work, and I don't so well remember how I got home." I interrupted him. "Were the boxes left in the hall?" "Yes, it was a big hall, and there was nothing else in it." I made one more attempt to further matters. "You didn't have any key?" "Never used to know key nor think. The old gent, he opened the door himself and shut it again when I drove off. I don't remember the last time, but that was the beer." "And you can't remember the number of the house?" "No, sir, but you needn't have no difficulty about that. It's nigh on with a stone front with a bow on it, and 8 steps up to the door. I know them stuff, having had carried the boxes with 3 loafers who had come round to earn a copper. The old gent give them shillings, and they seeing they got so much, they wanted more. Well, he took one of them by the shoulder and was like to throw him down the steps, till a lot of them went away cussin'." I thought that was this description I could find the house, so having paid my friend for his information, I started off for Piccadilly. I had gained a new painful experience. The Count could, it was evident, handle the earth boxes himself, If so, time was precious, for now that he had achieved a certain amount of distribution, he could, by choosing his own time, complete the task unobserved. At Piccadilly Circus, I discharged my cab and walked westward. Beyond the Junior Constitutional, I came across the house described and was satisfied that this was the next layer arranged by Dracula. The house looked as though it had been long untenanted. The windows were encrusted with dust and the shutters were up. All the framework was black with time, and from the iron the paint had mostly scaled away. It was evident that up to lately there had been a large notice board in front of the balcony. It had, however, been roughly torn away, the uprights which had supported it still remaining. Behind the rails of the balcony, I saw there were some loose boards, whose raw edges looked white. I would have given a good deal to have been able to see the notice board intact, as it would perhaps have given a clue to some of the ownership of the house. I remembered my experience of the investigation and purchase of Carfax, and I could not but feel that if I could find the former owner, there might be some means of gaining access to the house. There was at present nothing to be learned from the Piccadilly side, and nothing could be done, so I went around to the back to see if anything could be gathered from this quarter. The mews were active, the Piccadilly houses being mostly in occupation. I asked one or two of the grooms and helpers whom I saw around if they could tell me anything about the empty house. One of them said that he heard it had been lately taken, but he couldn't say for whom. He told me, however, that up to very lately there had been a notice board of for sale up, and that perhaps Mitchell, Sons and Candy, the house agents, could tell me something, as he thought he remembered seeing the name of that firm on the board. I did not wish to seem too eager or to let my informant know or guess too much, so thanking him in the usual manner, I strolled away. It was now growing dusk and the autumn night was closing in, so I did not lose any time. Having learned the address of Mitchell, Sons and Candy from a directory at the Berkeley, I was soon at their office in Sackville Street. The gentleman who saw me was particularly suave in manner, but uncommunicative in equal proportion. Having once told me that the Piccadilly house, which throughout our interview he called a mansion, was sold, he considered my business as concluded. When I asked who had purchased it, he opened his eyes a thought wider and paused for a few seconds before replying, "It is sold, sir." "Pardon me," I said, with equal politeness, "but I have a special reason for wishing to know who purchased it." And again he paused longer and raised his eyebrows still more. "It is sold, sir," was again his laconic reply. "Surely," I said, "you do not mind letting me know so much." "But I do mind," he answered. "The affairs of their clients are absolutely safe in the hands of Mitchell, Sons and Candy." This was manifestly a prig of the first water, and there was no use arguing with him. I thought I had best meet him on his own ground, so I said, "Your clients are happy in having so resolute a guardian of their confidence. I am myself a professional man." Here I handed in my card. "In this instance, I am not promoted by curiosity. I act in the part of Lord Godalming, who wishes to know something of the property which was, he understood, lately for sale." These words put a different complexion on affairs. He said, "I would like to oblige you if I could, Mr. Harker, and especially would I like to oblige his lordship. We once carried out a small matter of renting some chambers for him when he was the Honourable Arthur Holmwood. If you will let me have his lordship's address, I will consult the house on the subject, and will in any case communicate with his lordship by tonight's post. It will be a pleasure if he can so far deviate from our rules as to give the required information to his lordship." I wanted to secure a friend and not to make an enemy, so I thanked him, gave the address at Dr. Seward's, and came away. It was now dark and I was tired and hungry. I got a cup of tea at the Aberrated Bread Company and came down to Purfleet by the next train. I found all the others at home. Mina was looking tired and pale, but she made a gallant effort to be bright and cheerful. It wrung my heart to think that I had to keep anything from her, and so caused her inquietude. Thank God this will be the last night of her looking on our confidences, and feeling the sting of our not showing our confidence. It took all my courage to hold the wise resolution of keeping her out of our grim task. She seemed somehow more reconciled. or else the very subject seems to have become repugnant to her, for when any accidental allusion is made, she actually shudders. I am glad we made our resolution in time, as with such a feeling as this, our growing knowledge would be torture to her. I could not tell the others of the day's discovery till we were alone, so after dinner, followed by a little music to save appearances, even amongst ourselves, I took Mina to her room and left her to go to bed. The dear girl was more affectionate with me than ever, and clung to me as though she would detain me, but there was much to be talked of, and I came away. Thank God, the ceasing of telling things has made no difference between us. When I came down again, I found the others all gathered round the fire in the study. In the train, I had written my diary so far, and simply to read it off to them as the best means of letting them get abreast of my own information. When I had finished, Van Helsing said, "This has been a great day's work, friend Jonathan. Doubtless we are on the track of the missing boxes. If we find them all in that house, then our work is near the end. But if there be some missing, we must search until we find them. Then we shall make our final coup and hunt the wretch with his real death." We all sat silent a while, and all at once Mr. Morris spoke. "Say, how are we going to get into that house?" "We got into the other," answered Lord Godalming quickly. "Well, Art, this is different. We broke house at Carfax, but we had night and walked park to protect us, and will be a mighty different thing to commit burglary in Piccadilly, either by day or night. I confess I don't see how we're going to get in unless that agency duck can find us a key of some sort." Lord Godalming's brows contracted, and he stood up and walked about the room. By and by he stopped and said, turning from one to the other of us, "Quincy's head is level. This burglary business is getting serious. We got off once all right, but we have now a rare job on hand, unless we can find the Count's key basket." As nothing could well be done before morning, and as it would be at least advisable to wait till Lord Godalming could hear from Mitchell's, we decided not to take any active step before breakfast time. For a good while we sat and smoked, discussing the matter in its various lights and bearings. I took the opportunity of bringing this diary right up to the moment. I am very sleepy and shall go to bed. Just a line. Mina sleeps soundly, and her breathing is regular. Her forehead is puckered up in little wrinkles, as though she thinks even in her sleep. She is still too pale, but does not look so haggard that she did this morning. Tomorrow will, I hope, mend all this. She'll be herself at home in Exeter. Oh, but I'm sleepy. Dr. Seward's Diary, October 1st. I am puzzled afresh about Renfield. His moods change so rapidly that I find it difficult to keep touch of them, and as they always mean something more than his own well-being, they form a more than interesting study. This morning, when I went to see him after this repulse of Dr. Van Helsing, his manner was that of a man commanding destiny. He was, in fact, commanding destiny subjectively. He did not really care for any of the things of mere earth. He was in the clouds and looked down on all the weakness and wants of us poor mortals. I thought it would improve the occasion and learn something, so I asked him, "What about the flies these times?" He smiled on me in quite a superior sort of way. Such a smile would have become the face of Malvolio as he answered me. "The fly, my dear sir, has one striking feature. His wings are typical of the aerial powers of psychic faculties. The ancients did well when they typified the soul as a butterfly." I thought I would push his analogy to its utmost logically, so I said quickly, "Oh, it is the soul you are after now, is it?" His madness foiled his reason, and a puzzled look spread over his face as, shaking his head with a decision which I had but seldom seen in him, he said, oh no, I want no soul's life is all I want." Here he brightened up. "I am pretty indifferent about it at present. Life is all right. I have all I want. You must get a new patient, doctor, if you wish to study zoography." This puzzled me a little, so I drew him on. "Then you command life. You are a god, I suppose." He smiled with an ineffably benign superiority. "Oh no, far be it from me to arrogate myself to the attributes of a deity. I am not even concerned in his, especially spiritual doings. If I may state my intellectual position, I am, so far as concerns things purely terrestrial, somewhat in the positions which Enoch occupied spiritually. This was a poser to me. I could not at the moment recall Enoch's apostateness, so I had to ask a simple question, though I felt that by doing so, I was lowering myself in the eyes of the lunatic. And why with Enoch? Because he walked with God. I could not see the analogy, but did not like to admit it, so I harked back to what he had denied. So you don't care about life and you don't want souls. Why not? But I put my question quickly and somewhat sternly, in a purpose to disconcert him. The effort succeeded. For an instant he unconsciously relapsed into his old servile manner, bent low before me, and actually fawned upon me as he replied, "I don't want any souls, indeed I don't. I couldn't use them if I had them. They would be no manner of use for me. I couldn't eat them, or..." He suddenly stopped, and the old cunning look spread over his face like a wind sweep on the surface of the water. "And doctor, as to life, what is it after all? When you've got all you require, and you know that you will never want, that is all. I have friends, good friends like you, Dr. Seward." This was said in a leer of inexpressible cunning. "I know that I shall never lack the means of life." I think that through the cloudiness of his insanity, he saw some antagonism in me, for he at once fell back in his last refuge of such as he, a dogged silence. After a short time, I saw that for the present it was useless to speak to him. He was sulky, and so I came away. Later in the day he sent for me. Ordinarily I would not have come without special reason, but just at present I'm so interested in him that I would gladly make the effort. Besides, I am glad to have anything to help pass the time. Harker is out following up on clues, and so are Lord Godalming and Quincy. Van Helsing sits in my study poring over the record prepared by the Harkers. He seems to think that by accurate knowledge of all the details, he will light up some clue. He does not wish to be disturbed in the work without cause. I would have him taken with me to see the patient, only I thought that after his last repulse, he might not care to go again. There is also another reason. Renfield might not speak so freely before a third person as when he and I were alone. I found him sitting in the middle of the floor on his stool, a pose which is generally indicative of some mental energy on his part. When I came in, he said at once, as though the question had been waiting on his lips, "What about souls?" It was evident that my surmise had been correct. Unconscious cerebration was doing its work, even with this lunatic. I determined to have the matter out. "What about them yourself?" I asked. He did not reply for a moment, but looked all around him, and up and down, as though he expected to find some inspiration for an answer. "I don't want souls," he said in a feeble, apologetic way. The manner seemed preying on his mind, and so I determined to use it. Be cruel only to be kind, so I said, "You like life, and you want life." "Oh yes, but that is all right. You needn't worry about that." "But," I asked, "how are we going to get the life without getting the souls as well?" This seemed to puzzle him, so I followed it up. "A nice time you'll have some time when you're flying out there, but with souls of thousands of flies and spiders and birds and cats buzzing and twittering around and moaning all around you. They've got their lives, you know, and you must put up with their souls." Something seemed to affect his imagination, for he put his fingers to his ears and shut his eyes, screwing them up tightly, just as a small boy does when his face is being soaped. There was something pathetic in it, that it touched me. It almost gave me a lesson, for it seemed that before me was a child. Only, it was evident, only a child, though the features were worn and the stubble on the jaws was white. It was evident that he was undergoing some process of mental disturbance, and knowing how his past moods had interpreted things seemingly foreign to himself, I thought I would enter into his mind as well as I could and go with him. The first step was to restore confidence, so I asked him, speaking pretty loud so that he would hear me through his closed ears, "Would you like some sugar to get your flies round again?" He seemed to wake up at once and shook his head. With a laugh, he replied, "Not much. Flies are poor things after all." After a pause, he added, "But I don't want their souls buzzing round me all the same." "Or spiders?" I went on. "Oh, spiders! What is the use of spiders? There isn't anything in them to eat or—" He stopped suddenly as the thought reminded him of a forbidden topic. So? I thought to myself. This is the second time he has suddenly stopped at the word drink. What does it mean? Renfield seemed himself aware of having made a lapse, for he hurried on as though to distract my attention from it. I don't take any stock at all in such matters. Rats and mice and such small deer, as Shakespeare has it, chicken feed of the larder, they might be called. I am past that all sorts of nonsense. You might as well ask a man to eat molecules with a pair of chopsticks as to try to interest me about less carnivora, if I know of what is before me. I see, I said. You want big things that you can make your teeth meet in. How would you like to breakfast on an elephant? What ridiculous nonsense are you talking? He was getting too wide awake, so I thought I would press him hard. I wonder, I said reflectively, what an elephant's soul is like. The effect I desired was obtained, for he at once fell from his high horse and became a child again. I don't want an elephant's soul, or any soul at all, he said. For a few moments he sat despondently. Suddenly he jumped to his feet, with his eyes blazing all signs of intense cerebral excitement. "Hell with you and your souls," he shouted. "Why do you plague me about souls? Haven't I got enough to worry and pain to distract me already without thinking of souls?" He looked so hostile that I thought he was in for another homicidal fit, so I blew my whistle. The instant, however, that I did, he became calm and said apologetically, "Forgive me, Doctor, I forgot myself. You don't need any help. I am so worried in my mind that I am apt to be irritable. If you only knew the problem I have to face, and that I am working out, you would pity and tolerate and pardon me. Pray do not put me in a strait waistcoat. I want to think, and I cannot think freely when my body is confined. I'm sure you will understand." He had evidently self-control, so when the attendants came I told them not to mind, and they withdrew. Renfield watched them go. When the doors closed, he said with a considerable dignity and sweetness, "Dr. Stewart, you have been very considerate towards me. Believe me that I am very, very grateful to you." I thought it well to leave him in his mood, and so I came away. There is certainly something to ponder over in a man's state. Several points seem to make that the American interviewer calls a story, if one could only get them to a proper order. Here they are. Will not mention drinking. Fears the thought of being burdened with the soul of anything. Has no dread of wanting life in the future. Despises the meaner forms of life altogether, though he dreads being haunted by their souls. Logically, all these things point one way. He has an assurance of some kind that he will acquire some higher life. He dreads the consequences, the burden of a soul. Then it's human life he looks to. And the assurance. Merciful God, the Count has been to him. There's some new scheme of a terror afoot. Later, I went after my round to Van Helsing and told of my suspicion. He grew very grave, and after thinking the matter over for a while, he asked me to take him to Renfield. I did so. As we came to the door, we heard the lunatic within singing gaily, as he used to do so in time which now seems so long ago. When we entered, we saw with amazement that he had spread out his sugar as of old. The flies, lethargic with the autumn, were beginning to buzz into the room. We tried to make him talk of the subject of our previous conversation, but he would not attend. He went on with his singing, just as though we had not been present. He had got a scrap of paper and was folding it into a notebook. We had come away as ignorant as we went in. His case is curious indeed. We must watch him tonight. Letter. Mitchell, Sons and Candy to Lord Godalming. October 1st. My lord, we at all times only too happy to meet your wishes. We beg, with regard to the desire of your lordship, expressed by Mr. Harker on your behalf, to supply the following information concerning the sale and purchase of number 347 Piccadilly. The original vendors are the executioners of the late Mr. Archibald Winters Suffold. The purchaser is a foreign nobleman, Count de Ville, who effected the purchase himself, paying the purchase money in notes over the counter, if your lordship will pardon us using so vulgar an expression. Beyond this, we know nothing whatever of him. We are, my lord, your lordship's humble servants, Mitchell, Sons and Candy. Dr. Seward's Diary, October 2nd. I placed a man in the corridor last night and told him to make an accurate note of any sound he might hear from Renfield's room, and gave him instructions that, if there should be anything strange, he was to call me. After dinner, when we had all gathered round the fire in the study, Mrs. Harker having gone to bed, we discussed the attempts and discoveries of the day. Harker was the only one who had any result, and we are in great hopes that his clue may be an important one. Before going to bed, I went round to the patient's room and looked in through the observation trap. He was sleeping soundly. His heart rose and fell with regular respiration. This morning the man on duty reported me that a little after midnight he was restless and kept saying his prayers somewhat loudly. I asked him if that was all. He replied that it was all he heard. There was something about his manner so suspicious that I asked him to point blank if he had been asleep. He denied sleep, but admitted to having dozed for a while. It is too bad that men cannot be trusted unless they are watched. Today Harker is out on following up his clue, and Art and Quincy are looking after horses. Godalming thinks that it will be well to have horses always in readiness, for when we get the information which we seek, there will be no time to lose. We must sterilize all the imported earth between sunrise and sunset. We shall thus catch the Count at his weakest, and without a refuge to fly to. Van Helsing is off at the British Museum looking up some authorities on ancient medicine. The old physicians took account of things which their followers do not accept, and the professor is searching for witch and demon cures, which may be useful to us later. I sometimes think we must be all mad, and that we shall wake to sanity in straitcoats. Later, we have met again. We seem to at last be on track, and our work of tomorrow may be the beginning of the end. I wonder if Renfield's quiet has anything to do with this. His move to have so followed the doings of the Count, and that the coming destruction of the monster may be carried to him in some subtle way. If we could only get some hint as to what was passed in his mind. Between the time of my argument with him today and his resumption of fly-catching, it might afford us a viable clue. He is now seemingly quiet for a spell. Is he? That wild yell seemed to come from his room. The attendant came bursting into my room and told me that Renfield had somewhat met with some accident. He had heard him yell, and when he went to him, found him lying on his face on the floor, all covered with blood. I must go at once. Chapter 21. Dr. Seward's Diary. October 3rd. Let me put down with exactness all that happened, as well as I can remember since I last made an entry. Not a detail that I can recall must be forgotten. In all calmness, I must proceed. When I came to Renfield's room, I found him lying on the floor on his left side in a glittering pool of blood. When I went to remove him, it became all at once apparent that he had received some terrible injuries. There seemed none of the unity of purpose between the parts of the body which marks even lethargic sanity. As the face was exposed, I see that it was horribly bruised, as though it had been beaten against the floor. Indeed, it was from his face wounds that the pool of blood originated. The attendant who was kneeling beside the body said to me as we turned him over, "I think, sir, his back is broken. See, both his right arm and leg and the whole side of his face are paralyzed." How such a thing could have happened puzzled the attendant beyond measure. He seemed quite bewildered, and his brows were gathered in as he said, "I can't understand the two things. He could mark his face like that by beating his own head on the floor. I saw a young woman do it at once in Eversfield Asylum before anyone could lay hands on her. And I suppose he might have broken his neck by falling out of bed, if he'd gotten in an awkward kink. But for the life of me, I can't imagine how the two things occurred. If his back is broke, he couldn't beat his head, and if his face was like that before the fall out of the bed, there'd be no marks on it." I said to him, "Go to Dr. Van Helsing and ask him to kindly come here at once. I want him without an instant's delay." The man ran off, and within a few minutes the professor, in his dressing gown and slippers, appeared. When he saw Renfield on the ground, he looked keenly at him a moment, then turned to me. I think he recognized my thoughts in my eyes, for he said very quietly, manifestly for the ears of the attendant, "Ah, sad accident. You will need very carefully watching, and much attention. I shall stay with you myself, but I shall first dress myself. If you remain, I shall in a few minutes join you." The patient was now breathing strenuously, and it was easy to see that he had suffered some terrible injury. Van Helsing returned in his extraordinary celerity, bringing with him a surgical case. He had evidently been thinking and had his mind made up, for almost before he looked at the patient he whispered to me, "Send the attendant away. We must be alone with him when he becomes conscious after the operation. I said, I think that will do now, Simmons. We have done all that we can at present. You had better go to your round, and Dr. Van Helsing will operate. Let me know instantly if there be anything unusual anywhere. The man withdrew, and we went into a strict examination of the patient. The wounds of the face were superficial. The real injury was a depressed fracture of the skull, extending right up through the motor area. The professor thought a moment and said, We must reduce the pressure and get back to normal conditions as far as can be. The rapidity of the suffusion shows the terrible nature of his injury. The whole motor area seems affected. The suffusion of the brain will increase very quickly, so we must turpentine at once, or it may be too late. As he was speaking, there was a soft tapping at the door. I went over and opened it, and found in the corridor without Arthur and Quincy in pajamas and slippers, and the former spoke. I heard your man call up Dr. Van Helsing and tell him of an accident. So I woke Quincy, or rather called for him, as was not sleep. Things are moving too quickly and too strangely for a sound sleep for any of these times. I've been thinking that tomorrow night will not see things as they have been. We'll have to look back and forward a little more than we have done. May we come in? I nodded and held the door open till they had entered. Then I closed it again. When Quincy saw the attitude and state of the patient and noted the horrible pool on the floor, he said softly, My God, what has happened to him? The poor, poor devil. I told him briefly, and added that we expected he would recover consciousness after the operation. For a short time, at all events. He went at once and sat down on the edge of the bed, with Godalming beside him. We all watched in patience. We shall wait, said Dr. Van Helsing, just long enough to fix the best spot for trepanning, so that we may most quickly and perfectly remove the blood clot, for it is evident that the hemorrhaging is increasing. The minutes during which we waited passed with fearful slowness. I had a horrible sinking in my heart, and from Van Helsing's face I gathered that he felt some fear or apprehension as to what was to come. I dreaded the words Renfield might speak. I was positively afraid to think, but the conviction of what was coming was on me, and as I have read of men who have heard the death watch, the poor man's breathing came in uncertain gasps. Each instant he seemed to go as though he would open his eyes and speak, but then would follow a prolonged stertorous breath, and he would relapse to a more fixed insensibility. Inured I was to sickbeds and death. The suspense grew and grew upon me. I could almost hear the beating of my own heart, and the blood surging through my temples sounded like blows from a hammer. The silence finally became agonizing. I looked at my companions, one after another, and saw their flushed faces and damp brows that they were enduring equal torture. There was a nervous suspense over us all, as though overhead some dread bell would peal out powerfully when we should least expect it. At last there came a time when it was evident that the patient was sinking fast. He might die at any moment. I looked up at the professor and caught his eyes fixed on mine. His face was sternly set as he spoke. There is no time to lose. His words may be worth many lives. I have been thinking so as I stood here. It may be there is a soul at stake. We shall operate just above the ear. Without another word he made the operation. For a few moments the breathing continued to be stertorous, when there came a breath so prolonged that it seemed as though it would tear open his chest. Suddenly his eyes opened and became in a wild, helpless state. This was continued for a few moments. Then it was softened to a glad surprise, and from his lips came a sigh of relief. He moved convulsively, and as he did so said, Be quiet, doctor. Tell them to take off the strait waistcoat. I have had a terrible dream. It has left me so weak I cannot move. What's wrong with my face? It feels so swollen and it smarts dreadfully. He tried to turn his head, but even with the effort, his eyes seemed to grow glassy again, so I gently put them back. Then Van Helsing said in a quiet, grave tone, Tell us of your dream, Mr. Renfield. As he heard the voice, his face brightened. Though its mutilation, he said, That is Dr. Van Helsing. How good it is of you to be here. Give me some water. My lips are dry, and I shall try to tell you. I dreamed... He stopped and seemed fainting. I called quietly to Quincy. The brandy is in my study. Quick. He flew and returned with a glass, the decanter of brandy, and a carafe of water. We moistened the parched lips, and the patient quickly revived. It seemed, however, that his poor injured brain had been working in the interval, for when he was quite conscious he looked at me piercingly with an agonized confusion which I shall never forget, and said, "I must not deceive myself. It was no dream, but all a grim reality." Then his eyes roved around the room. As they caught sight of the two figures sitting patiently on the edge of the bed, he went on, "If I were not sure already, I would know from them." For an instant his eyes closed, not with pain or sleep, but voluntarily, as though he were bringing all his faculties to bear. When he opened them, he said, hurriedly, and with more energy than he had yet displayed, "Quick, doctor, quick! I am dying. I feel that I have but a few minutes, and then I must go back to death, or worse. Wet my lips with brandy again. I have something that I must say before I die, or before my poor crushed brain dies anyhow. Thank you. It was that night after you left me, when I implored you let me go away. I couldn't speak then, for I thought my tongue was tied, but I was sane then, except in the way I am now. I was in an agony of despair for a long time after you left me. It seemed hours. Then there came a sudden peace to me. My brain seemed to become cool again. I realized where I was. I heard the dogs bark behind our house, but not where he was." As he spoke, Van Helsing's eyes never blinked, but his hand came out and met mine and gripped it hard. He did not, however, betray himself. He nodded slightly and said, "Go on," in a low voice. Renfield proceeded. He came up to the window in the mists, and as I had seen him often before, but he was solid then, not a ghost. His eyes were fierce like a man's when angry. He was laughing with his red mouth. The sharp white teeth glinted in the moonlight when he turned to look over back to the belt of trees to where the dogs were barking. I wouldn't ask him to come then first, though I knew he wanted to, just as he wanted all along. Then he began to promise me things, not in words but by doing them. He was interrupted by a word from the professor. How? By making them happen, just as he used to send in the flies when the sun was shining, great big fat ones, with steel and sapphire on their wings, and big moths in the night, with skull and crossbones on their backs. Van Helsing nodded to him, as he whispered to me unconsciously. The Eclairipha atrophis of the Sphinx is what you call the death's head moth. The patient went on without stopping. Then he began to whisper, "Rats, rats, rats, hundreds, thousands, millions of them, and every one alive, and dogs to eat them, and cats too, all lives, all red blood with years of life in it, not merely buzzing flies." I laughed at him, for I wanted to see what he could do. Then the dogs howled, away beyond the dark trees in his house. He beckoned to me in the window. I got up and looked out, and he raised his hands, and seemed to call out without using any words. A dark mass spread over the grass, coming on like the shape of a flame of fire. Then he moved the mist to the left and right. I could see that there were thousands of rats with their eyes blazing red, like his, only smaller. He held up his hand, and they all stopped. I thought he seemed to be saying, "All these lives I will give to you, I, and many more, and greater, though countless ages, if you will fall down and worship me." And then a red cloud, like the color of blood, seemed to close over my eyes, and before I knew what I was doing, I found myself opening the sash and saying to him, "Come in, Lord and Master." The rats were all gone, but he slid into the room through the sash, though it was only open an inch wide, just as the moon herself has often come through into the tiniest crack, and stood before me in all her size and splendor. His voice was weaker, so I moistened his lips with the brandy again, and he continued, but it seemed as though his memory had gone on working in an interval, for his story was further advanced. I was about to call him back to the point, but Van Helsing whispered to me, "Let him go on. Do not interrupt him. He cannot go back, and maybe could not proceed at all if once he lost the thread of his thought." He proceeded. "All day I waited to hear from him, but he did not send me anything, not even a blowfly. And when the moon got up, I was pretty angry with him. When he did slide through the window, though it was shut, and did not even knock, I got mad at him. He stared at me, and his white face looked out of the mist with his red eyes gleaming, and he went on, as though he owned the whole place, and I was no one. He didn't even smell the same as he went by me. I couldn't hold him. I thought that somehow Mrs. Harker had come into the room." The two men sitting on the bed stood up and came over, standing beside him so that he could not see them, but where they could hear him better. They were both silent, but the professor started and quivered. His face, however, grew grimmer and sterner still. Renfield went on without noticing. "When Mrs. Harker came in to see me this afternoon, she wasn't the same. It was like tea after the teapot has been watered. Here we all moved, but no one said a word. He went on. I don't know that she was here till she spoke, and she didn't look the same. I don't care for the pale people. I ate them with lots of blood in them, and hers all seemed to have run out. I didn't think of it at the time, but when she went away I began to think, and it made me mad to know that he had been taking the life out of her. I could feel that the rest quivered, as I did, but we remained otherwise still. So when she came tonight, I was ready for him. I saw the mist stealing in. I grabbed it tight. I heard that the madmen have unnatural strength, and as I knew I was a madman any times anyhow, I resolved to use his power. He felt it too, for he had to come out of the mist to struggle with me. I held tight, and I thought I was going to win, for I didn't mean him to take any more of her life, till I saw his eyes. They burned into me, and my strength became like water. He sipped through it. When I tried to cling to him, he raised me up and flung me down. There was a red cloud before me, and a noise like thunder, and the mist seemed to steal away under the door. His voice became fainter, and his breath more strenuous. Van Helsing stood up instinctively now. We know the rest now, he said. He is here, and we know his purpose. It may not be too late. Let us be armed, the same as we were the other night. We'll no lose this time. There's not an instant to spare. There's no need to put out our fear, nay our convictions into words. We shared them in common. We all hurried and took for our rooms the same things that we had when we entered the Count's house. The professor had his ready, and we met in the corridor. He pointed them to significantly as he said, They never leave me. They shall not, till this unhappy business is over. The virus also, my friends. There is no common enemy that we deal with, alas. Alas, that dear Mother Mina should suffer. He stopped. His voice was breaking, and I do not know if rage or terror predominated in my own heart. Outside the Harker's door we paused. Arthur and Quincy held back, and the latter said, Should we disturb her? We must, said Van Helsing grimly. If the door be locked, I shall break it in. May it not frighten her terribly. It is unusual to break into a lady's room. Van Helsing said solemnly, You are always right, but this is life and death. All chambers are unlike the doctor. And even were they not, they are all as one to me tonight. Friend John, when I turn the handle, if the door tries not to open, do you put your shoulder down and shove, and you too, my friends. Now! He turned the handle as he spoke, but the door did not yield. We threw ourselves against it. With a crash, it burst open. We almost fell headlong into the room. The professor actually did fall, and I saw him across as he gathered himself from his hands and knees. What I saw appalled me. I felt my hair rise like bristles on the back of my neck, and my heart seemed to stand still. The moonlight was so bright that, through the thick yellow blind, the room was light enough to see. On the bed beside the window lay Jonathan Harker, his face flushed and breathing heavily as though in a stupor. Kneeling over the edge of the bed, facing outwards, was the white-clad figure of his wife. By her stood a tall, thin man clad in black. His face was turned from us, but the instant we saw, we all recognized the Count, in every way, even to the scar on his forehead. With his left hand, he threw both Miss Harker's hands, keeping them away with her arms at full attention. His right hand gripped her by the back of her neck, forcing her to face down onto his bosom. Her white nightdress was smeared with blood, and a thin stream trickled down the man's bare chest, which was shown by his torn-open dress. The attitude of the two had a terrible resemblance to a child forcing a kitten's nose into a saucer of milk to compel it to drink. As we burst into the room, the Count turned his face, and the hellish look that I had heard described seemed to leap into it. His eyes flamed red with devilish passion. The great nostrils of the white aquiline nose opened wide and quivered at the edge, and with white, sharp teeth behind the full lips of the blood-dripping mouth, clamped together like those of a wild beast. With a wrench which threw his victim back upon the bed as though hurled from a height, he turned and sprang at us. But by this time the professor had gained his feet and was hopping towards him with an envelope which contained the sacred wafer. The Count suddenly stopped, just as poor Lucy had done outside the tomb, and cowered back. Further and further back he cowered, as we, lifting our crucifixes, advanced. The moonlight suddenly failed, as a great black cloud sailed across the sky, and when the gaslight sprang under Quincy's match, we saw nothing but a faint vapor. This, as we looked, trailed under the door, which, with the recoiled from its bursting open, had swung back into its old position. Van Helsing, Arthur, and I moved forward to Mrs. Harker, who by this time had drawn her breath, and with it had given a scream so wild, so ear-piercing, so despairing that it seems to me now that it will ring in my ears till my dying day. For a few seconds she lay in her helpless attitude and disarray. Her face was ghastly, with a pallor which seemed accentuated by the blood which smeared her lips and cheeks and chin. From her throat trickled a thin stream of blood. Her eyes were mad with terror. Then she put her poor crushed hands, which bore on their whiteness the red mark of the Count's terrible grip, and from behind them came a low, desolate wail, which made the terrible scream seem only the quick expression of an endless grief. Van Helsing stepped forward and drew the coverlet gently over her body. Arthur, after looking at her face for an instant despairingly, ran out of the room. Van Helsing whispered to me, "Jonathan is in the stupor as we know the vampire can produce. We cannot do nothing with poor Madame Mina for a few moments till she recovers herself. I must wake him." He dripped the edge of the towel in a cold water, and with it began to flick him on the face, his wife all the while holding her face between her hands and sobbing in a way that was heartbreaking to hear. I raised the blind and looked out of the window. There was much moonshine, and as I looked I could see Quincy Morris run across the lawn and hide himself in the shadow of a great yew tree. It puzzled me to think why he was doing this, but at that instant I heard Harker's quick exclamation as he woke to a partial consciousness and turned to the bed. On his face, as there might well be a look of wild amazement, he seemed dazed for a few seconds, and then full consciousness seemed to burst upon him all at once, and he started up. His wife was aroused by the quick movement and turned to him with his arms stretched out, as though to embrace him. Instantly, however, she drew them in again, and putting her elbows together, held her hands before her face, and shuddered till the bed beneath her shook. "What in God's name does this mean?" Harker cried out. "Dr. Seward, Dr. Van Helsing, what is it? What has happened? What is wrong? Mina dear, what is it? What does that blood mean? My God, has it come to this?" And raising himself to his knees, he beat his hands wildly together. God, help us! Help her! Oh, help her!" With a quick movement, he jumped from the bed and began to pull on his clothes, all the man in him awake at the need for an instant exertion. "What has happened? Tell me all about it," he cried without pausing. "Dr. Van Helsing, you love Mina, I know. Oh, do something to save her. It cannot have gone too far yet. Guard her while I look for him." His wife, through her terror and horror and distress, saw some sure danger to him. Instantly forgetting her own grief, she seized hold of him and cried out, No, Jonathan, you must not leave me. I have suffered enough tonight, God knows, without the dread of his harming you. You must stay with me. Stay with these friends who will watch over you." Her expression became frantic as she spoke, and he yielding to her, she pulled him down, sitting on the bedside, and clung to him fiercely. Van Helsing and I tried to calm them both. The professor held up his golden crucifix and said, with a wonderful calmness, "Do not fear, my dear. We are here, and as this is close to you, no foul thing can approach. You are safe for tonight. We must be calm and take counsel together." She shuddered and was silent, holding her head down on her husband's breast. When she raised it, his white nightrobe was stained with blood where her lips had touched, and where the thin open wound on the neck had sent forth drops. The instant she saw it, she drew back with a low wail and whispered, almost choking sobs, Unclean, I must touch him or kiss him no more. Oh, that it should be that it is, that I am who now is his worst enemy, and whom he hath most cause to fear." To this he spoke out resolutely, "Nonsense, Mina. It is a shame to me to hear such a word. I will not hear it from you, and I shall not hear it from you. May God judge me by my deserts, and punish me for more the bitter suffering than even this hour, if any act or will of mine ever anything come between us." He put out his arms and folded her to his breast, and for a while she lay there sobbing. He looked at us and bowed over her head, with eyes that blinked damply above his quivering nostrils. His mouth was set as steel. After a while her sobs became less frequent and more faint, and then said to me, speaking with a studied calmness which I felt tried his nervous power to the utmost, "And now, Dr. Seward, tell me all about it. Too well I know the broad fact. Tell me all that has been." I told him exactly what had happened, and he listened with seeming impassiveness, but his nostrils twitched and his eyes blazed as I told the ruthlessness of the Count had held his wife in that terrible and horrid position, with her arms and her mouth to the open wound with his breast. It interested me, even at that moment, to see that whilst the face of the white-set passion worked convulsively over the bowed head, the hands tenderly and lovingly stroked the ruffled hair. Just as I finished, Quincy and Godalming knocked at the door. They entered in obedience to our summons. Van Helsing looked at me questioningly. I understood him to mean if we were to take advantage of their coming to divert, if possible, the thoughts of the unhappy husband and wife from each other and from themselves. So on nodding acquiescence to him, he asked them what they had seen or done, to which Lord Godalming answered, "I could not see him anywhere in the passage, or in any of our rooms. I looked at the study, but though he had been there, he had gone. He had, however—" He stopped suddenly, looking at the poor, drooping figure on the bed. Van Helsing said gravely, "Go on, friend Arthur. We want here no more concealments. Our hope now is in knowing all. Tell freely." So Arthur went on. He had been there, and though it could only have been for a few seconds, he made a rare hay of the place. All the manuscript had been burned, and the blue flames were flickering amongst the white ashes. The cylinder of your photograph, too, were thrown into the fire, and the wax had helped the flames. Here I interrupted. "Thank God there's another copy in the safe." His face lit for a moment, but fell again as he went on. "I ran downstairs then, but could see no sign of him. I looked into Renfield's room, but there was no trace there except—" Again he paused. "Go on," said Harker hoarsely. So he bowed his head and, moistening his lips with his tongue, added, "Except that that poor fellow is dead." Mrs. Harker raised her head, looking from one to the other of us as she said solemnly, "God's will be done." I could not but feel that Arthur was keeping back something, but as I took it that it was with a purpose, I said nothing. Van Helsing turned to Morris and asked, "Adieu, friend Quincy. Have you anything to tell?" "A little," he answered. "It may be such eventually, but at present I can't say. I thought it well to know if possible where the Count would go when he left the house. I did not see him, but I saw a bat rise from Renfield's window and flap westward. I expect to see him in some shape to go back to Carfax, but he evidently sought some other lair. He would not be back tonight, for the sky is reddening in the east, and the dawn is close. We must work tomorrow." He said the latter words through his shut teeth. For a space of perhaps a couple minutes there was a silence, though I could fancy that I could hear the sound of hearts beating. Then Van Helsing said, placing his hand tenderly on Mrs. Harker's head, "And now, Madam Mina, poor dear Madam Mina, tell us exactly what happened. God knows that I do not want that you be pained, but it is need that we know all. For now more than ever has all work to be done quick and sharp, and in deadly earnest. The day is close to us that must end all, if it may be so, and now the chance that we may live and learn." The poor dear lady shivered, and I could see the tension of her nerves as she clasped her husband closer to her, and bent her head lower and lower, still in his breast. Then she raised her head proudly, and held out one hand to Van Helsing, who took it in his, and after stooping, kissing it reverently, held it fast. The other hand was locked in that of her husband, who held his other arm thrown round her protectingly. After a pause in which she was not evidently ordering her thoughts, she began. "I took the sleeping draught which you had so kindly given me, but for a long time it did not act. I seemed to become more wakeful, and myriads of horrible fancies began to crowd upon my mind, all of them connected with death, the vampires, the blood, the pain and trouble." Her husband involuntarily groaned as she turned to him and said lovingly, "Do not fret, dear. You must be brave and strong, and help me through the horrible task. If you only knew what an effort it is to me to tell of this fearful thing at all, you would understand how much I need your help." Well, I saw I must try to help the medicine to its work with my will, if it was to do me any good, so I resolutely set myself to sleep. Sure enough, sleep must soon have come to me, for I remember no more. Jonathan coming in and had not waked me, for he lay by my side when I next remember. There in the room, the same thin white mist that I before had noticed, but I forget now if you know of this. You will find it in my diary, which I shall show you later. I felt the same vague terror which had come to me before, and and the same sense of presence. I turned to wake Jonathan, but found that he slept so soundly that it seemed as if it was he who had not taken the sleeping draught, and not I. I tried, but I could not wake him. This caused me a great fear, and I looked around terrified, and indeed my heart sank within me. Beside the bed, as if he had stepped out of the mist, or rather as if the mist had turned into his figure, for it had entirely disappeared, stood a tall, thin man in all black. I knew him at once from the description of the others, the waxen face, the high aquiline nose, on which the light fell in a thin white line, the parted red lips with the sharp white teeth showing between them, and the red eyes I had seemed to see in the sunset in the windows of St. Mary's Church at Whitby. I knew, too, that the red scar on his forehead where Jonathan had struck him. For an instant my heart stood still, and I would have screamed out, only that I was paralyzed. In the pause he spoke in a sort of keen, cutting whisper, pointing as he spoke to Jonathan. "Silence! If you make a sound, I shall take him and dash his brains out before your very eyes." I was appalled, and was too bewildered to do or say anything. With a mocking smile he placed one hand upon my shoulder and, holding me tight, bared my throat with the other. As he did so, "First, a little refreshment to reward my exertions. You may as well be quiet. It is not the first time or the second that your veins have appeased my thirst." I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I did not want to hinder him. I suppose it is part of the horrible curse that such is, when his touch is on his victim. But oh my God, pity me. He placed his reeking lips upon my throat. Her husband groaned again. She clasped her hand harder and looked at him pityingly, as if he were the injured one, and went on. I felt my strength fading away, and I was in a half-swoon. How long this horrible thing lasted I know not, but it seemed that a long time must have passed before he took his foul, awful, sneering mouth away. I saw it drip with fresh blood. The remembrance seemed for a while to overpower her, and she drooped and would have sunk down but for her husband's sustaining arm. With a great effort she recovered herself and went on. Then he spoke to me mockingly. "And so you, like the others, would play your brains against mine. You would help these men hunt me and frustrate me on my design. You know now, and they know in part already, and will know in full before long, what it is to cross my path. They should have kept their energies for use closer to home, as they played their wits against me who commanded nations and intrigued for them and fought for them hundreds of years before they were born. I was countermining them, and you, their best beloved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, my bountiful wine-press for a while. It shall be later on my companion and my helper. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them shall minister to your needs. But yet as you are to be punished for what you have done, you have aided in thwarting me. Now you shall come to my call. When my brain says come to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding. And to that end, this." With that he pulled open his shirt, and with the long, sharp nails opened the vein on his breast. When the blood began to spurt out, he took my hands in one of his, holding them tight, and with the other seized my neck and pressed my mouth to the wound, so that I must either suffocate or swallow some to the... Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done to deserve such a fate? I who have tried to walk in meekness and righteousness all my days. God pity me. Look down on a poor soul in poor than mortal peril. And in mercy pity those whom she is dear. Then she began to rub her lips as though to cleanse them from pollution. As she was telling her terrible story, the eastern sky began to quicken, and everything became more and more clear. Harker was still and quiet, but over his face, as the awful narrative went on, came a grey look which deepened and deepened in the morning light, till when the first red streak of the coming dawn shot up, the flesh stood darkly out against the whitening hair. We have arranged that one of us is to stay within call of the unhappy pair till we can meet together and arrange about taking action. Of this I am sure. The sun rises today on no more miserable house in all the great round of its daily course. Thank you. That was part 11 of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Thank you for listening, and good night.